You ready for me to turn on the camera and the mic?
Yes.
Dawn, you're going to record?
I can, yeah.
Normally I'm in the video-free zone over here.
Well, I thought we were.
Up front and center.
I've let everyone in.
Okay, so everybody who is trying to join has joined as of now.
Yes, I believe so.
All right, well, it's 6:32 then, and I'll call the meeting to order. And as usual, the very first thing we have is 10 minutes set aside for public comment. And let's begin. Does anybody in the public have anything you want to comment on right now? That's not to say that as we go through the agenda, you can't ask to comment, and usually I let people comment as we go through, but if there's something you want to say right now, this is the time reserved for it. Yes?
Hi, my name is Eric. I just have some questions about the first page, the action recommendation from the superintendent. I'm just curious about the grade levels that'll be considered to be going into a middle school, 6 through 8, rather than 7 through 9?
6 through 8, yes.
I see. And how many students would there be in that category in the school system right
Again,
now?
this is a comment period rather than a question period, but if anybody has an immediate answer to the question, go ahead.
300 and 350.
Yes, that's correct. Between 300 and 350.
So the current school system in place, all the facilities would be reduced by a total of 350 students who would then come to wherever the new school would be.
Well, when you say the system, they stay in the same system.
No, but, well,
Facility.
Facility, right?
No.
So Floodbrook School would have 25 fewer kids. Okay, I was just also curious whether the board is gonna, before they hold their sessions, are they gonna have an analysis of all the costs of this proposal before they hold public meetings?
Well, the board has to discuss that, but that's part of the recommendation that they happen. So they haven't talked about that yet.
Will they?
Tonight. That's one of the items on our agenda.
Pardon?
That's one of the items on our agenda. Yeah. So the answer is yes, but it hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
No, I don't have my hand up, thank
Okay.
you. Please go ahead.
Again, I'll probably let people make comments as we go along, but if there's something you want to say right now, just addressing the people who are physically here first, then I'll get to the people who are remote.
You need to get the people to indicate that they're going to.
Now, if you are remote, could you please use the hand raise function because the screen can't accommodate everybody at the same time. To do that, you go to the reaction symbol at the bottom of your screen, and once you click that, one of the options is hand raise. It's not the same thing as wave, by the way. Most of you know this. I'm not seeing any hand raises on the screen here.
Randy, are you checking the other 15 or?
Yeah, they
I
would
think
come
it
to
would
the
show
front.
on the selection if somebody raised a hand. I'm not sure, though.
Deb's got her hand
Okay,
up.
Deb has a hand raised, just so we can see it works. Deb, did you actually want to say anything?
No.
She's our test case.
Thank you for testing it out, okay? All right. Let's go and briefly, because we're allowed to do today, just read to ourselves the board norms. And I would particularly call everybody's attention to the very first bullet under we will conduct ourselves. So, shall we go to the middle school study, which is the next item on the agenda? Randy?
Okay, so it's nice to see so many people here. And we have, as I believe everybody here at the meeting knows, we have spent about the last year or so in taking a long time, but really exploring the idea of whether or not a regional middle school is something that our community needs, that would really benefit our middle school learners. So we have spent time with David Stephen, who's joining us this evening from New Vista Design. David does a much better job of introducing himself than I do, so I'll leave that to him. But starting in January, we've had groups of people meeting with David to get a sense of what types of programming and offerings might we be able to provide our students, and looking at how well those dovetail with what we currently offer. If you are not familiar with the work that's been done so far, I would encourage you to go to the brsu.org website and click on, I think it's Middle School Study, that tab in the middle of the homepage, and there's a lot of resources there that talk about, that show you what the work is that we've done so far. So David is going to share with us this evening a summary, essentially, of the work that was completed, and then so the board will have, he'll present, and then the board will have an opportunity to ask questions, and then I have a recommendation in the packet for next steps for the board to discuss and consider. Okay, so David, we turn it over to you.
All right, good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? Thumbs up in the audience if you can. Okay, great. Well, happy to be here with you tonight. I have a presentation that's gonna last about 25 minutes. I'm going to be going through some of the high-level priorities that were established during the visioning process, and just a little bit about my background and how I got into doing this work. I'm a licensed architect, but I also worked for 20 years as an educator, high school teacher, assistant principal, and I do a lot of work in New England and around the country, working with schools that are looking to either renovate their existing buildings or create new buildings, and help them go through a process of sort of really clarifying what their educational goals are, and their as well as their design goals. Now I'm getting an echo in the back here from, I'm kind of hearing myself. Are the people hearing that echo? Yeah, some other people are.
Down here.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe we'll see how that evolves. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Not that.
I think all of us online should mute ourselves.
I think that's
Yep.
I think that's what we should do.
Yeah. See if that helps, and if not, David, they recommend just turning your volume down a tiny bit, but see if that helps first.
Yeah, and I'm going to just turn my volume down. So I've got a 25 minutes worth of presentation. I'm going to go through things relatively quickly, and then at the end we'll open up for questions. So yeah, so here we go. Can everybody see that screen okay? Yep. All right. Good. So I'm going to give a bit of a. All right, I'm going to bring up my sound way down so I don't hear that echo. I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the visioning process. I'm going to talk to you about our priority goals that have been discussed in terms of your educational, architectural, and community goals. We also did an exploration of what future-ready teaching and learning means to your faculty, to your community, to your students, and then we connected that all to thoughts about the ways that we approach 21st century school design to get the most flexible buildings possible. So this is part of a visioning process that I have done here in Massachusetts with probably over about 100 schools in the last 15 years. It's always customized to the needs of the community. But what we like to do is meet with an educational leadership team to sort of develop a strategy for how to include a group of people in this conversation and who to include. Whoops, sorry about that. Hold on. And then we establish an educational working group. In this case, we established a group of 35 participants that engaged in 3 workshops that covered, first focused on your educational vision and priorities, then connected them to ideas about design patterns, and then talked about key spaces and adjacencies, blue sky ideas. In addition to that group of 35 people, we also met with a group, of community members. I believe there were about 33 people that participated in that forum. We met with a group of 27 teachers from your 3 different middle schools, and we met with a group of 26 students from your 3 different middle schools. So we engaged in 7 workshops. They were all virtual, and we used a platform called Mentimeter to collect feedback, and this enabled people to log on to a website and to interact with the slides that I was showing, so we could collect a lot of information. This is an anonymous platform. People could feel free to share their ideas, and then what I did is I took all the notes from those workshops and put them together in a consolidated format. Now, the focus for this study was looking at BRSU long-term goals, big picture, looking at having K-8s or a standalone middle school, discussions of elements of future-ready teaching and learning, approaches to school design, and specifically BRSU middle school needs. Now, all of this is high-level visioning that would apply to any different context, including staying within your K-8 format, because we could have good conversations about the ways that your buildings are meeting your needs now and not meeting your needs, and think about ways to hack those buildings either through no to low cost renovations or more substantial renovation additions or potentially new construction. We wanted to, again, this high level visioning connects to all of those different options and really is an opportunity to discuss your current educational practices, aspirational goals for the future. We want to share lots of best practice examples of schools that have been designed and built in the last 5 years, but it's not about being trendy, it's about looking at what is most practical for your context, what's most cost effective in terms of the outcome that you're looking to achieve, and what will give you the most flexibility in the coming decades, because we know that delivery methods are going to continue to change and evolve. So we certainly also wanted to build upon your current agenda, your school improvement plan, the district education plan, and your Taconic and Green ends policy. So you had already done as a district quite a lot of work sort of thinking about what that vision is for what you want your students to know and be able to do. So all of these notes are available, and I believe they were all sent to you along with this slideshow packet last week. There's a 71-page set of notes that gets into quite a lot of detail about each of the different workshops and looks at the common themes that are coming up or that came up within it, and I'm going to review some of those. Before I get into those specific priorities, I wanted to just say a few words about, I do a lot of work through the Mass School Building Authority, which controls the school building process in Massachusetts. It's a funding partner for public schools. And they have a very thoughtful kind of approach to how do we design practical and flexible, adaptable buildings. And so just right off the bat, we know that anytime we're talking about a renovated or new school, there are certain just things that are just givens that we know we need to include, which is full handicapped compliance. We need to be thinking about security, safety in terms of passive and active measures. We need to be thinking about heating and cooling because we look at schools being used 365, 24/7. We think about technology and modular furniture, well-sized classrooms. We know that natural light is really important in terms of learning outcomes. Other things that we think about are maximizing relationship to the outdoors. And of course, this is a theme that came up a lot in our visioning workshops about the importance of connecting kids to the outdoors and to environmental education. push in special education, which means that we're doing differentiated approaches, working with kids, meeting them where they're at, and that in general is happening within the context of the classroom whenever possible, or in small group rooms nearby, unless you have separate programs that require specific features and a specific location. We think about safe drop-off and pickup, sustainable building features that also can be interactive in terms of the building itself, being a teacher, and we think about adequate number of bathrooms and gender-neutral bathrooms. So those are some of the big picture themes. And other overarching themes just around the way that we design schools these days, as different from, say, 30 or 40 years ago, is if we're fully wired, every square inch of the building can be used. It's not just, learning is not just happening in classrooms. We want to create flexible, multi-use spaces, extend the learning beyond the classroom walls, build synergy between varied spaces, big spaces, small spaces, more formal spaces, informal spaces. And we also like to define clusters that create small school community. And this is something that's particularly relevant as we think about a middle school. Now, even at 350 students, that's a small school, relatively speaking. But within that, we can create small learning communities in which teachers and students are teamed in ways in which those students are known really well. Teachers can work in interdisciplinary kind of ways. And we talked quite a bit about that with your teachers. We also want to think about the classrooms themselves being as agile, multi-purpose as possible, providing venues for hands-on learning. And when we talked to your students, that was one of the big themes that came up. They wanted a lot more kind of hands-on opportunities and project-based learning or connecting learning to the community. Supporting community use and access. This is a resource for the community whenever we design or renovate a school. How do we safely let the community use that, maybe block off whole areas of the school and leave some areas that are free for use after hours and on weekends, so it's really a community center. And how do we just foster community connections in general? So with that, and I know I'm going quickly here, we'll have time for Q&A at the end, and again, a lot of this information is in your the notes packet. I'm not going to read through all of this stuff. I'm going to hit through some of the big picture themes that came up. So we always start the conversation with what are your educational priorities? And right up at the top of the list is equity and inclusion, and making sure that all students and middle school students in BRSU have equitable opportunities. We talked about having a strong middle school curriculum with student-centered approaches in which there's special education support and a focus on your Taconic and green sort of transferable skill building, giving kids the confidence to be sort of more proactive learners. A lot of how that happens is through hands-on and project-based learning, real-world application. STEM and STEAM is a great way to sort of focus that real-world kind of content and discovery. Integrated and meaningful learning experiences, and your teachers and your students both all talked about this a lot. Also sustainability, environmental stewardship, arts and electives, really kind of infusing the arts in a more sort of robust way. Increased sports options, we know how important that is in a middle school environment in particular. Connections with the community, and promoting diversity and cultural opportunities. As well as your teacher opportunities. Now, in terms of architectural features, a good community fit, we want it to be functional, we want kids to want to be there, teachers to want to be there, community members to want to be there. In particular, thinking about the needs of middle school programming around flexibility, around safety and security. Other big picture themes, good flow throughout the building, being able to easily find your way. That connects to kind of the universal design approach. Having small group spaces in addition to classrooms, and that's another big thing that we're doing in schools these days, is putting in meeting rooms and small group rooms interspersed with classrooms that give you the opportunity for kids to do small group work, testing, de-escalation, or it fulfills a lot of different functions, maybe for teacher meeting, things like that. Teacher planning spaces, And then specific spaces to support programming like STEM, STEAM, art, athletics. Nursing came up as having a nursing space that feels adequate. Natural light throughout, connections to the outdoors. Storage is always big because especially if you're doing project-based learning, you gotta have good storage. And then having cafeteria and library spaces that were also multifunctional. And finally, we talked about community priorities. And so again, equity, inclusion, and inclusion came up. Really, again, the experience that all middle school students have within the district will be equitable, functional, cost-effective, promoting community access, the idea of a community learning center, is particularly access to things like indoor and outdoor athletic spaces, opportunities for after-school and summer programming, and programming for elementary age students as well, potentially. Also space for adult learners, potentially, and the school in general being a community resource that really fosters partnerships. Of course, transportation also came up as something to be really thinking about if you are, in fact, going to be combining your middle schools. So those were some of the highlights of the priorities that we talked about. We also just got into a discussion of what future-ready learning means at the district level. And we know that lots of schools are thinking, in addition to mastery of core academic content, they're thinking about ways to give kids sort of higher order thinking skills, like these 4 or 5 C's. We'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute. Connecting to project-based learning, STEM and STEAM, and then the idea of social emotional learning, which really is something that, particularly on the middle school level, we want kids to feel a sense of belonging and ownership, and to really feel like there's a number of adults in the building that know them well. So in general, we think about learning environments that are student-centric, more active and flexible. We know that technology is going to continue to evolve. We're thinking at least one-to-one technology, but it's really about having that technology where you need it, when you need it. And we need collaborative and project-based environments, as well as more traditional subject-based and individual sort of quiet areas where kids can get focused. So it's about having that variety and that flexibility. Now this all very much connects to your Taconic and Green global ends policy, which talks about all of those higher order thinking skills in connection to being lifelong learners and developing agency and confidence in students, connected to all of these great things like self-advocacy and goal setting and co-creating learning. Also thinking about your transferable skills, which very much relate to the idea of those 5 C's: communication, creativity, citizenship, critical thinking, and self-direction. So we talked to initially your leadership and then to the various groups that we met with and asked them sort of what their priority educational focus areas were. And I'm going to go through them real quickly right now. Again, I'm looking at, want to make sure I keep on time here. And so we're going to breeze through these. Again, they're more, you can see them in the notes in much greater detail. But related very much to your Taconic and Green global ends policy, the idea right at the top of student-centered and lifelong learning, students developing agency and confidence as learners. Visual and performing arts came up, and I'm listing these in order of the priority that they were rated in within our discussion. So visual and performing arts was right there near the top, and having allowing kids to have creative expression and communication. And one of the ways that we do that in buildings is we also make the building itself like a blank slate where people can be creating sort of a palpable sense of sort of display and exhibition and what kids are learning. Push in and differentiated instruction, which means that there's oftentimes multiple adults in a classroom. We also need to be thinking about learning stations within a classroom, and many things happening at the same time, as well as small group work, things like English language learner support or sub-separate programming. Academic growth mindset, and again, these are the things that were prioritized by the group as being of highest importance. And this is really sort of the value of hard work over innate intelligence, teaching kids that it's okay to try and be challenged, and developing sort of perseverance and grit in the face of sort of as you're learning new things. Developing your social emotional skills in terms of your social awareness, self-awareness, relationship skills. Thinking about how to support teaching teams in terms of professional learning communities, and in a middle school environment, this is definitely, we think about cross-discipline sort of instruction, which if you're doing project-based learning is very important to sort of create those connections between different disciplines. We are preparing kids for high school, but they're also coming from an elementary school environment where they've had much more connectivity. So this is again something that that your middle school teachers are thinking a lot about, how to support that teaming. Project-based and experiential learning, which means performance-based assessment. Kids are creating products. We need good storage in your classrooms. We need flat tables that kids can spread out on. And the community itself can serve as text, because there's all sorts of great, authentic ways that kids can apply the content that they're learning, and that real-world connections, and kids creating products that they share with the community, and that opportunities for service learning, for mentoring, and for display and exhibition of all the great things that they're thinking about and doing. Outdoor discovery came up many, many times. The idea of wilderness activities, hands-on science, and really promoting that actually on site as well as in some of the programs that you have outside of school. Health and wellness, which connects to athletics, as well as mental health support, that kind of fitness approach, but also outdoor connections. It also could connect to natural light and natural materials. Universal design for learning, which, and one of the big things that your students said is they wanted more choice. They wanted to be able to choose more in terms of electives, and try out things that were more hands-on. Now, universal design is really about recognizing that kids have very different learning styles, and that we want to give them different ways to represent, express, and engage with the content that they're learning. And mastery of core academics is really kind of like either the foundation or the umbrella for everything, because that's what all of the other stuff is sort of in service of this. But if you look at standardized tests throughout the country, what you can see is that they are really incorporating those 5 C's, in that they are looking for literacy and numeracy, but they're also really looking for kids to be thinkers, and for them to be able to cite evidence from text and be able to apply certain things that they've learned through other contexts and situations. So that kind of like higher order thinking skills, those higher order thinking skills are very much baked into core academics at this point. And one example is next gen science standards, which, you know, science has always been very much around experiments and hypotheses and stuff, but these are all action verbs around kids learning content and then doing something with them, and then demonstrating what they've done with them and being able to communicate that to other people. And STEM and STEAM connects very much to that, because there's such great curriculum around it. It's a lot about the engineering design process and the design thinking process, and art and humanities are very much a part of that too when you get to STEAM. So it's really kind of an integrated way of approaching content. And finally, world language came up as of being important, and at that as connected also to cultural proficiency. So again, I know I'm moving quickly. I have one more thing to share with you as an overview, and that's really the design piece of our conversation. So we shared 36 different, what we call design patterns, sort of ways to get people thinking about how schools are designed and how we approach It's either sort of connecting spaces together or to design particular things like entryways or classrooms or things like that. So we shared these patterns. People had the opportunity to rate them both individually and then in small groups. And what I'm going to share with you now are the top 20, and these are in priority order of how they were rated by your various groups. And so here are the design patterns. This is it's a way of sharing best practice examples, but it's a way of us working together to create a common language about what it is that's most important to you. So again, I'm going to share them in priority order. I have 2 sets of 10. I've got another sort of 10 minutes here, so I'm going to go through each for about 30 seconds and give you the highlights of sort of what they're about. So outdoor learning and connections. And again, this is the top vote getter. Thinking about how to connect the school to the environment, to its site. That could be things like outdoor classrooms that have connectivity as well. That could be things like a makerspace with a garage door that opens out into a building area. It could be things like your fields or eating courtyard. So outdoor connections. Safe community access. The idea that the building itself is a community center that's accessible after hours. And you can see here in this plan of a middle high school in Massachusetts that here's the main entry. We've got the gym, cafeteria, auditorium, band, local cable access TV. And all of this is accessible after hours and on weekends, and you can just completely lock off the rest of the school. So all of this can be locked off, and this becomes a standalone community center. Security and welcome, top of mind for a lot of people. We want to create a very effective gatekeeping mechanism to make sure that we are controlling who gets into the school and when. At the same time, we don't want it to feel like a prison. We want it to feel warm and welcoming. So there's a lot of principles of security and welcome that we can talk about in terms of promoting a feeling of safety. One big part of that is good visual kind of connectivity and also a clear way of navigating a building so you always know where you are. Good sight lines and a double lock kind of entry vestibule where you can easily control who's coming into the building. STEM, STEAM, and maker spaces. These are spaces that promote project-based learning. They actually don't need a lot of bells and whistles. You need flat table surfaces that you can spread out on. You need good storage for bins of all the different kits for the things that you're doing. And it's good to have electrical, maybe that pulls down from the ceiling, and sort of a robust technology infrastructure. Sustainability, we want to teach our kids to be good stewards of the environment. It's also a very practical approach to making sure that your energy costs for maintaining your buildings are as low as possible, and the building itself, through passive and active measures, can become a teacher for the students. Agile classrooms, still the basic building block. We want good natural light, good access to electrical, modular furniture that's easy to rearrange, good storage maybe behind things like sliding whiteboards. Now, sometimes, if you want to increase flexibility, you can think about things like a movable wall with a very good sound transmission coefficient that is like a solid wall when you close it, but all of a sudden gives you, 1,800 square feet of space instead of just one classroom. That really kind of opens up flexibility for both team teaching, but also for things like exhibitions. Clusters of learning. We talked a lot about adjacencies between spaces. This is a school in Denver in which these are classroom neighborhoods that are organized by grade level, and each one has a teacher planning area, as well as representing each of the different core content areas. And that creates its own little community there. There's a larger community that people can be part of, but there also is a smaller community. Professional work areas, spaces where teachers can go for planning, for independent work, for group planning, and also if they need a place to eat. Now, one of the things about professional work areas that we're putting them in a lot of schools because actually we want to increase utilization of classrooms. So if a teacher has a planning period, they shouldn't be in their classroom necessarily. They can go to a place where they can collaborate. Somebody else uses that classroom. We get much better utilization. It's a practical approach. Gathering in multi-purpose spaces where we've got places like a cafetorium where you might have a stage. This becomes a great multi-purpose space for the community, or things like a black box theater. So we want to think about, what are some of those places where large school community, whole school community can be built, and where performance can take place. And it's great if it can double as your cafe as well. The idea of anywhere, anytime learning. That means that if we're teaching kids to develop agency and independence, then we need to give them opportunities to practice doing that while we can still kind of informally supervise them. So building in transparency and areas where they can work in small groups or work with technology in close proximity to classrooms. And this is again the idea of that we're using all those between spaces that would otherwise be useless hallways that take up a lot of square footage and are not good spaces for kind of facilitating learning, even though we see a lot of stuff happening in hallways. And we have one more set here. Classroom neighborhoods connects to that idea of clusters of learning. Here's a diagram of middle high school where you've got essentially a double loaded corridor, but instead of but you took one of the teeth out here and created a team room and then put some windows in. Here's a teacher planning area. So all of a sudden this becomes a neighborhood. It's got some special ed classrooms, it's got some bathrooms nearby. This is something that's quite easy to do in a renovation in a double loaded corridor. You take out one of the walls and suddenly there's a there because it's not just this long hallway, but you're creating a community. And that is definitely something that for middle school kind of delivery can be very effective. Enrichment spaces, these are spaces that we want to centrally locate whenever possible. We want to showcase what's going on within them and make sure that you have the right palette of enrichment spaces. Breakout and quiet spaces, here's an example of a breakout room between two classrooms. All of a sudden, first of all, you can connect these two classrooms together if you're doing team teaching, if you have some small group stuff going on. You can have students in here and they're right next door, so you can easily monitor them. Or you might have nooks in your hallways or in your classrooms where kids can get focused. The heart of the school. So often in a school, there is not a central place where the whole community comes together. So we look at the cafeteria, or sometimes the media center as being that kind of town square where whole group community can be built. It also serves for those larger gatherings and also that multi-purpose space for the community. We want flexible science labs. The approach now to designing science labs is not to have any fixed stations in the middle of the floor, but to have all perimeter stations where you would have your gas and your water and your air, and then everything else is movable so that the classroom itself becomes much more flexible. Career tech education came up a bunch in our workshops as things that the students and the community were interested in, having more exposure for kids to the ways in which what they're learning connects to ideas about careers. And having a video lab is one great way to do that. Media center, we think of media centers now as not just quiet places, but really they're where a lot of the collaborative work happens, as well as where access to technology happens, where you also might have your STEAM lab or your maker space or quiet reading rooms, that it's also one of the kind of hubs of the school, the hearts of the school. Flexible spaces, here are some examples of those between spaces. This is at Sanford Regional Technical Center in Sanford, Maine. And here, instead of hallway, we've got furniture that allows you to do that kind of more independent work. Now this is in a more of a high school environment. In a middle school environment, we would tend to make that much more in closer proximity to a classroom or connected immediately outside. Here's an example of living room space around which there are 6 classrooms clustered. This would otherwise be a hallway. It's no more square footage, but it's much more effective use of the space. They've got a stage, they've got audio visual. And then responsive spaces. This was a design pattern that actually your group made up. One of your small groups made up, and then we talked about a lot what that would mean. And that's just spaces that really respond to the needs of students. So spaces, first of all, that respond to your context in terms of wanting to be sustainable, maybe bring the outside in, being able to kind of advertise what's going on, all the great things going on in the school. Things like big whiteboards in the hallways or gathering spaces where you could have smaller gatherings or do small group work and use those between spaces. So that is, that's it right there. And I'm gonna stop presenting.
Okay, so
Let's see. Are you still seeing my screen?
Yes.
We are,
no, we can see you.
All
We're
right.
not.
How do I
We're muted.
stop?
No, we're not seeing your screen.
right.
We're not seeing your screen. You stopped sharing it. Did you unmute it?
Yes.
Okay. David, we are not seeing your screen. You're fine.
Oh, you're not seeing my
Yeah,
screen?
yes. We're not seeing it. You're fine. So,
We're seeing you
Okay,
on your
yeah.
screen.
yep.
He's adjusting for speaker.
All right, I know that was a lot very quickly, and I had to turn down my sound so that I wasn't getting that echo, so I hope there weren't like hands being raised or, but I know we had built in some time for some Q&A.
Questions from board members, including those who are remote. If you're remote, try to use the hand raise function if you're a board member.
Do we need to change the view so that we can see?
I think we do need to change the view so we can.
Yeah, I am not
Okay.
sure, I'm not sure how to,
No, we're doing it at this end, don't worry.
okay.
I can see it too if somebody raises their hand.
Here we go. I'm not seeing any electronic hands. Questions from board members who are physically here?
Sure,
Yeah, John.
I'll ask a question. I was listening, sorry, I was dropping off my daughter. So I look in the executive summary, and there's some mention of MTSS. I don't know, in Massachusetts, you might hear RTI or something like that. And I heard you mention flexible spaces, and I wonder if, though, you've worked with any schools who've done a really good job, having pyramid response to intervention or multi-tier systems of support as an main element of design for their spaces. And
Sure.
And rather, we've gone from a traditional model of special ed and regular ed. How do we design spaces so it's one continuum? Is the direction we're going here.
Right. So that delivery of special, I'm gonna have to turn my sound down because it's echoing again. That delivery of special education, I think, there are a couple of ways that we look at that. One is that we tend to make classrooms larger than we used to make them. That a typical, you have small class sizes. You have small schools and small class sizes. And a typical classroom size of say 20 to 24 students, you would normally, a traditional school might have been 800 square feet for a classroom. We're looking at more like 900 or 950 square feet. And the reason is because we're not having a teacher stand up at the front anymore or at the, at the teaching station and with kids facing in one way and not, that we're taking up a lot more space in the classroom. Because we need to be able to organize those station-based kind of, you might have 4 different things going on at one point in your classroom. And, some of the kids might be working with a paraprofessional or an aide that is working with them. Other kids might be doing a small project. So it's larger classrooms, more flexible furniture, adjacent breakout rooms, and they don't have to be huge, but it's always good to have them immediately available. And then when necessary, and oftentimes you have things like OT, or occupational therapy, physical therapy, and sub-separate programs that might be located in a specific space. But in general, we're trying to build that differentiated, kind of that response to intervention into those general ed classrooms by making them that much more flexible.
Thank you. And do you see special ed space, the square footage of the special ed space reduced therefore?
Well, that really depends on, in general, we're looking at a lot more special ed square footage in schools that we build these days. Because we're tasked by the state to meet kids more where they're at and recognizing that kids do have very different needs, which will require sort of different kinds of interventions or delivery. So I don't think that special ed rooms are necessarily smaller. I think that we're just thinking more carefully about how we integrate more of that into the general ed classroom, so maybe we need fewer of them. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Very helpful.
Sure.
Other questions from board members, either here or remote? All right, Randy and our presenter, thank you very much.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you, David.
Okay. All right, Randy, we will be in touch.
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for all your help. I really appreciate everything you did for our community and the time you spent with us, so thank you.
It's been great, so I'll follow up with you soon.
Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda, back at page 3, is a recommendation. We need a motion.
I'll move it.
Moved by Jeff, that we
Second.
accept the recommendation, I assume that's what the motion is?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a motion by Jeff Wilson, seconded by Dick Dale to accept the recommendation that's on packet page 3.
Could I?
Yes.
I'm just wondering for the folks, maybe remote or people who are here, I don't know if they know what the recommendation is. I don't know if they have a copy of it. It might be helpful just to read that recommendation part. Because
Sure.
it's relatively brief.
Yeah. It is the recommendation of the superintendent that the Taconic and Green Regional School District Board continue exploring the formation of a regional middle school for students in grades 6 through 8 that would be located in the town of Manchester. The recommendation includes 1, the board creating a board middle school study committee to lead future work. 2, the board approving an analysis of A, the current Manchester Elementary Middle School, MEMS, building for renovation, and B, the current MEMS building for expansion or addition, and C, the current MEMS property for new construction for a middle school, and D, determining if there is property in Manchester that would serve as a viable lot for constructing a new school. 3, the analysis outlined in number 2 above will include alignment from visioning work outcomes. I don't know what that means. Estimates of cost comparisons and construction recommendations to the board. 4, the board holding community engagement sessions across towns, I assume that means in several towns, over the next 3 to 6 months to share information with community members and answer questions. What does alignment from visioning work outcomes mean?
That it's aligned with what we just read, the visioning work that we just completed. So essentially, we're incorporating that into the analyses that are recommended.
So another way to say it would be alignment with the outcomes, is that right?
Sure.
Okay. former foreign language teachers always get prickly about things like this.
That's good, if that helps with understanding.
Okay, so we've now had the motion and we've had the recommendation read. Is there discussion? And at this point, I would, Jim,
I guess just one question, where, to create the committee, is what's the composition of the committee expected to be? Or what would you be shooting for?
So I did not make a specific recommendation of that. I haven't thought through that.
I think the effect would be it would go on a future agenda, right?
Right, I mean, I think that some of this warrants some more conversation, but I would like the board to establish a committee, which it hasn't had before, and then you could determine that. Sort of a transfer of responsibility a little bit, that's what my intention is, and then we can work together on next steps.
Jim?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, since we had Truex Collins come in before and look at look from an architect's standpoint at our buildings and all, is that going to be really useful groundwork for?
It's not enough
Okay.
to draw on. We're gonna have to do more work. And you did budget money for FY '24 to do this work. So I don't know if it's enough, depending on the scope, but we did budget funds for this.
Well, I was just gonna say, that the committee we had originally was a committee of the superintendent, basically, to look at this. And as Randy just indicated, it's gonna be a transfer responsibility to the board in toto. So the board is gonna be the one appointing the committee, but I would still hope that Randy would make a recommendation as to who should be made up,
Happy
what the
to do
committee
that.
should be made, makeup should be.
Dick?
I agree with Jeff. He and I both were the board representatives to that initial committee, along with community members and teachers and principals. And we began with the most important statement is there a sound educational, and I mean total educational, rationale for continuing to explore the concept of a middle school? And the conclusion of that initial committee, after the Truex report, was that based on substantial input from the superintendent, that there is a substantial advantage to be gained in our community by the establishment of a middle school. Then, the next phase, as it is outlined in the recommendation of the superintendent, was to vision what are the possibilities. There are so many options out there. And I know that Ben and I were a part of that group, and it was a very thoughtful group, and you've seen the results of that group. It was comprehensive. But throughout all of it, and as an underpinning, is what are we doing now, was a question, that is not measuring up to the goals of the Taconic and Green and its end policies. And what could be accomplished or gained by further exploring different aspects in a prioritized way of potential design. And none of this was independent of the idea that in order to promote such an organization, substantial community input needed to be done, substantial design work needed to be done, and much more detail with respect to the several items, particularly item 2 and 3, and including issues like cost, because it's important that not only do we as a board, if we choose to go in the direction to put to voters the idea of a middle school, it's going to be costly. And the voters have got to see not only the rationale, but perceive the financial as well as educational, emotional, community benefits of such a reorganization. And we need to be very proactive, not only about exploring these ideas with the community, which is why item 4 is on it, but also let that whole process evolve in a way that this community proposes what, in my humble view, having served on 2 of the committees, is something that logic suggests that a middle school would be of considerable advantage. So that's why the committee is being set up, and the construction and organization needs to be, as was pointed out when we first talked about this as a board, directed and orchestrated and embraced by the board. Now, what the construction is and who should be on it, I don't think that this recommendation is defining that, but that is part of why we're having this discussion tonight.
Thank you, Dave. Any other, yes, Melanie?
I'll piggyback off that a little bit with what we just saw was great and really exciting, and seems like there's a lot of goals, like clearly defined goals, right, that we can look at. But I would love to kind of have a look at what some of these identified shortcomings are from our current configuration. And I don't know if that's something, I mean, it came out of the meeting, right? And we're talking about not having shared spaces, but we're not saying, right now we can't provide this in our current configuration. And I'd love to see that at some point. And I think the public would need that information also, so that so it's very, very clear, not just that we're excited about this new thing, but what our goals are, without making our schools look bad.
Have you, do you need something more than what's already on the website that we shared in the fall with the superintendent, the feedback that I provided? I'm happy to write more, but I just, you know.
Maybe I should look at that again. I know I went through some stuff.
That would be, it would be just helpful for me to know
Okay.
what additional type of information you're looking for.
And are you talking about something other than the meeting notes that were recently made available?
So in the fall, in October, when I presented information to you as a board, included in that was a document that I wrote for the original middle school study committee.
Okay.
Because they wanted to understand more what my concerns were. So that information was shared with you as a board in October. It's also posted on the website. So,
The October 2022
yeah,
presentation, okay.
and there's a superintendent, if you look, there's this, I think we pulled it out specifically. I'm not on there right now, but.
No, I'm actually looking at it. And sure, I'll look back through this. I forgot that this existed. I knew that we had done that work. I guess maybe I was just asking.
That's okay.
Where
I'm
it was,
happy
yeah.
to provide more details. That was in October. I have more I could say now, if you're interested in that.
Okay.
Jeff?
No, I think that was very good, and again, that was a while ago. If you could maybe just send it out again, and if
Sure.
there's any additional updates to it that maybe, you're able to do without a lot of additional labor.
Yeah.
It
might
is
be
right,
nice.
yeah, it's right on the main page. It's
Right.
easy to find.
Yeah. Just,
Jim?
just also a thought along with that, the problem isn't that, I don't think that we don't have enough information and stuff, it's actually, there's so much
Right.
that being able to sort it out
Yeah,
and have
yeah,
people,
and that's-
understand it
Right.
is the tough part, especially when they're doing community outreach, because you gotta you gotta get them,
Right.
you
You
have to
gotta
make
make
it easy
that
for
through
them.
line clear. Right.
Send it to the press.
Lindsay? Yeah.
I might be jumping the gun here, but I'm just wondering if there is like a deadline of when the decision needs to be made, yes, we're doing this, and get things going, because I feel like sometimes we can get stuck on such nitty gritty things, it can make things really pushed out. So like, is there a goal to say, by next summer, we wanna have from the board the approval to go forward with? If that's what they want to start building it, or is there not a time frame for that?
So I would say that probably the answer to that will lie with the committee. And so the deadline would exist based on when, if the project moves forward, when it goes to, when you want it to go to the voters for a bond vote. So, as I've thought about it, we've got, March of '24, where we know that we've got our annual school district election, primaries in August, and an election in November. So next year we happen to have 3 times that we would likely have above average voter turnout. So that's something that I would say to the committee to think about. And I know Sue's been anxiously wondering the same answer to that question as well, because hasn't heard from me about my recommendations on the timeline either, but I think that's a reasonable discussion from my perspective for the board to have. When do you want to shoot for, and what do we need to accomplish in that timeframe?
Thanks for asking the question.
It's a good point.
Yeah. Ben?
I'm just wondering about the, number 3 talks about analysis of the options and linking to cost comparisons and construction recommendations. And I'm just also wondering if we want to include something explicitly about funding sources. We can put all this on as a bond issue, but there may be some other creative ways of bringing in some funds to support this kind of work. And we probably ought to start thinking about that as soon as possible, so.
I see there was another hand over here. Dick, go ahead.
At one point, because there is now currently no federal reimbursement for either renovation or new building, or state reimbursement, although the legislature did spend some time talking about the need to replace almost all of the school buildings built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which includes virtually all of our buildings. The estimate that was explored briefly by our initial committee was that from the moment funding is secured and contracts are written, it's a minimum of 2 or more years to complete the building. And there are a whole bunch of other issues, in particular transportation issues and what to do to maximize the educational opportunities for the students who remain in the buildings at this particular point. That's not included, but it certainly would be part of an analysis or commitment to do a middle school building. The initial committee did consider what would happen to the current buildings and how to best utilize those as educational opportunities while preserving the necessary elementary school local community point of view. My feeling is if we can get our work done in time for at least one of those voting periods, then we have an opportunity to get yes or no on a bond issue, which is likely to be the primary source of funding.
Just want to remind you that the motion is that we continue exploring, and there are some non-inclusive specifics following it, so let's try to keep the discussion to that. John?
A couple things. The analysis number 2 is, analysis is conducted by whom? Is that us, along with Stephen, or who's conducting the analysis? Or the committee? Consultant?
Yeah, so from my thought process in the language was that we would be hiring somebody to do it.
Okay.
Those recommendations would go to the committee. That would all be, and in the analysis would be included all of these. So my intention was that it's sort of this comprehensive, holistic analysis of our options in line with the priorities that we've identified as a community.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't from the middle school study committee.
No,
okay,
all
right.
of this is
Yep. That's what I thought.
in the new board committee.
And I think along with Ben, I was thinking along similar lines too, and maybe David has maybe some models he's looked at with schools, public, private, funding sources, and there's this idea that people have for some reason that public schools, people aren't willing to give the public schools because they already pay taxpayer dollars. Well, they pay taxpayer dollars for Burton, and I don't really understand that rationale. So is there a way for us to shift that paradigm, and ease some strain on taxpayers? And third thing, I'm sorry for my comments, but have you looked at like the model, and maybe in the fall report you did this a little bit, but what's the model of maybe more of a thought exercise? If we knock down no buildings, if there was no concrete poured, and everything, all buildings status quo, can we make what would it look like if we had to make that regional middle school happen tomorrow? And, and you talked about that, and, I was wondering if it's worth thinking about that phased approach of, I hate to say build the airplane as you're flying in it, but, iterative process of, maybe we'll learn some things along the way, so. But is that in the fall report, with that?
The middle school study committee talked about that in their work.
Uh-huh.
We can pull back up those notes. I mean, it was essentially me running through numbers of enrollment and shifting and what could potentially be, and none of those options felt great given the numbers that we were working with from last year. But we can, I think it's I can get all that information together for the committee to review as part of this. I mean, I think everything should be put on the table as you kind of move into this next stage, if you decide to move into this next stage.
Thank you.
Any other board members, including the two that have had the most recent experience with middle schools?
That means parents.
Can I just ask for my clarification? Ben made a suggestion about costs, and it sounded to me maybe like a proposed amendment to include this idea of exploration of additional funding sources. And I didn't know if
maybe
we.
in there anyway, I mean, the language is broad enough that we could just, as a board, say, yes, that's something we're gonna do, and
Yep.
without amending it. That sounds fine to me.
Yeah, I think your bill, Ann, it says the recommendation includes, it doesn't
Yep.
say this is everything.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Melanie?
The last item, the board holding committee engagement sessions, I'm assuming that would mean that the committee would wrap around that, or do we think the whole board?
My intention was that would be part of what the committee
Work is.
does as their work. That, again, that was where I was coming from with it, but if you see it differently.
Question on that, do you mean that the new committee would set up the sessions, but you wouldn't expect the only board members to ever attend would just be the board members who are on the committee though, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
but they would kind of put together the whole idea and package and recommendations and then bring it to the board.
Jim?
Oh, same.
Okay, same thing, okay.
But consistent with the new communications committee and the expanded opportunities to engage our community.
Yeah. Okay. I did say that I would I'll probably allow comments from public, and I think I will just for a few minutes here. If there is a member of the public, either remotely or in the room, that wants to say something we haven't already heard, we'll give you an opportunity. And if you're remote, use the hand raise, please. Well, I don't see anybody. Okay. Let's then take a vote on the motion. Everybody clear on what the motion is? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Deb, are you raising a hand, or are you, okay, thank you. All right, anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. All right, that passes, I believe, unanimously. I think it did pass unanimously. All right, we need a motion on the consent agenda.
I move the approval of the consent agenda.
All right, is there a second? Second. Seconded by Alex. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of passing the consent agenda, please.
David has his hand up.
Whoops.
I have a quick question.
Go
Can I
ahead.
ask a quick question?
Sure can.
One of the positions is listed as a math teacher, but the qualifications are very much a music teacher. I was just wondering if there was a typo. The second one listed.
I doubt if there is, David. I noticed the same thing. Please don't mention names here.
I was trying not to.
Yeah.
I only have that. I don't have,
I have it. Let's go.
I don't have the backup information right here.
All right, well, I was just curious.
All I can say is from my reading of it, it doesn't appear to be a typo.
Yeah, it's, I don't believe that it is.
Well, all the qualifications were for a music person, so I was just wondering,
Yeah.
if there was other information that you knew, or there was a mistake, but.
Yeah, so I'm happy to look into it, David, more. I've had a
Okay.
whole lot of these crossing my desk recently, so I don't want to misspeak, but I'm more than happy to look it up and provide the board with some additional information if you want.
David, do you want to disengage any part of this from the consent agenda?
No,
Okay.
no, I'm assuming that the process was accurate and that there will be a good explanation.
Okay. Any other discussion on the consent agenda? All right, all those in favor of it, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Pardon? I believe that was unanimous. It is unanimous, all right? So we have an action item on the Stratton land, well, not to approve it because it hasn't happened, it's not imminent, but to approve basically going forward on it, correct?
Correct.
It's item 6A on the agenda, packet pages 8 and 9.
Yep. So,
Anybody have any questions on that?
Can I just step back, are we planning to appoint a committee at the next meeting in August? For the
Are you
middle
talking
school?
about the Stratton land, what?
No, the middle school study committee.
Yes.
We just
That'll
voted
be on a
to,
future agenda.
okay, thank you.
I can't guarantee it'll be on the August agenda, but I think it would be.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Back to the Stratton land transfer. Anybody have any questions? Pretty good description of it on packet page 8. Yes, Ben?
Just curious if there's, if this will have restrictions on how the land can be used, or if that is part of the discussion to come still.
it's to come. This recommendation is just making the board aware and understanding, yes, we'd like to move forward with the conversations. All the rest of the discussion will happen once you say, yeah, sure, go ahead, I think it's worth exploring. And we understand that we'll absorb the attorney costs and Stratton will take care of all of the,
Survey.
no, thank you.
Permit.
Permits, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Takes a
Any other
village.
questions, Jim?
I was just curious, there's, it's interesting, could be wonderful, the school's already using it and all that, great, but, there's a building on the property, building in a tennis court, what
Yeah,
exactly
so
is that?
that would not be included.
That's ours.
That
So
would
that's
not-
the part that's gonna be excluded, so it's just where would those,
So it's just the,
yes,
sort of, okay.
the wooded part. So when Jeff's on here, Jeff's Cavagnino's on, he just put on his camera, he's from Stratton, so, he's representing Stratton side of this, so joined us in case you had questions for him. But the idea would be, we're gonna work to subdivide this property so that the wooded property with all the trails that the community uses would would be transferred to us. The
Okay.
building and that stuff would not be transferred to us. And so, once
So
we
that-
have all this hashed out, we'd bring the details
Right.
to you.
If you look at the survey, it says showing lot number 2 to be conveyed, and lot number 2 is the strange-looking one, not the triangular one.
So where's our school? I thought the building was Floodbrook, no?
To the left, if you look at
To the left of it.
if you look at the satellite imagery, it shows the schools
That's
up
the school.
to the left of it.
That's the
Well,
school
the-
there, I see, okay.
Ben?
The reason I asked about use was that one of the great issues or potentials for this property is continued use for access to the woods and trails, which I think is excellent, and it is already being used by the school. My kids have been in school, so I'm familiar with this. But one of the things that struck me as interesting is recognizing that the other portion of the parcel is being used for housing for employees at Stratton. One of the issues that we're facing in our community is access to housing for school teachers and community members, parents of young children who might attend our school. And it just made me think about potential uses of land that the school might have, and the district might have access to, and the potential for partnership around affordable housing, potentially linking into the existing facilities that Stratton has. So again, I don't want to, I know that's for future, but I just wanted to put that out there as a consideration and conversation. And Jeff, having you on here has brought that to mind as well.
Any other discussion on the motion? Actually, have we had a motion yet?
I'm
Yeah, well, I think we have.
move the,
Second.
I moved. I'm so excited.
Dick has moved that we approve what's on packet page 8. It's been seconded by Jim. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, everyone in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. I believe that's unanimous. It is unanimous.
We'll be in touch, Jeff.
Okay, next item is the staff union memorandum of agreement.
I
Dick,
move the acceptance of the staff memorandum of agreement.
it's on packet pages 12 and 13, 12. Is there a second? Seconded by Jim. Any discussion? Jim?
It's just a question, it's, between the T&G board, Meadowy board, and Taconic and Green School Staff Association, not the Meadowy.
Yeah, so the association, when it was originally formed, was formed by T&G staff, and that was the name. When Meadowy decided
So
to
it
join,
covers
they
both.
kept the name.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, just, yep, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Because somewhere else it said that the superintendent would talk with the associations or something. So I was-
On this document?
No,
No.
Somewhere
No,
else.
somewhere
Okay.
else.
Okay.
in the.
Yeah.
In cyberspace.
Any other questions? All right. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. I think that was unanimous. It was. Okay. Let's see, let's take a look at the monitoring of policy 2.2. Which is a report, nothing, non-action item, just something to look at,
What were the questions?
but there might be questions or comments. Jeff?
Well, Randy had a question, which,
Randy's not-
which we can
She'll be
answer,
right.
which I'll try to answer. But secondly, the one thing that we haven't done yet, and we made a lot of progress because we actually have the CEO's first monitoring report to look at, but we haven't determined a process for review yet. And just looking at the minutes,
We're on 2.2.
and just looking at the minutes of our, I guess it was our last meeting, maybe not our last special meeting, there is reference there to the policy committee looking at monitoring. And you can look at a process for reviewing the monitoring report by the board. There are different options. We could spend an hour doing it tonight, or there's other approaches that can be taken, maybe analogous to what we do in concert with board reports, or board policies. But in any event, I thought there was some discussion about the policy committee actually looking at this issue and coming back to the board with some ideas about and recommendations as to how to actually review these monitoring reports the CEO, i.e. the superintendent, puts together. And I think that would make some sense.
I think what you just said also ties in with the very last sentence in Randy's report.
Establishment of a policy committee.
Yeah, and it's on the agenda farther down here too.
What's the last sentence now?
I am requesting that the board provide a clarification about 2.2.2.
Right. I can take a whack at that if you'd like.
Sure.
That basically follows what Carver has in his book, Carver being sort of our spiritual leader on policy governance. And it's worded a little different, but the way I interpret it, based on what he says, is it means that, and I'll give you an example, if a teacher files a grievance That's a non-disruptive, legal type of approach to protest something, that the superintendent can therefore not retaliate or discriminate against that teacher at a future date. And so that's the meaning, I think, that I would view as 2.2.2.
Or if it was simply non-disruptively raised during a faculty meeting, same
Right.
thing, right?
Yeah, I was just using that as an example of the grievance, but, yeah.
I think that that's the purpose of reappointing the policy committee, to address not only this particular concern,
Right.
but all of the ones you have raised over the last series of
That's it,
meetings, and to resolve some of those issues and propose language
Right.
that the board can move forward with in a more efficient and effective
Right.
manner.
So just so I'm clear, because I'm on the policy committee, I think you might be right, Dick, that we're talking about maybe two things, but certainly one about looking at the various policies to see which ones are out of line, which ones need to be massaged and or a better interpretation or even repealed, who knows?
For all of the monitoring reports so far, there have been at least one, if not more, board members who have
Right.
made suggestions for clarification.
Right, and they might be right, they might be wrong. But that's, and so we'll see.
But that was the,
Right, but that's one thing, but the other thing is actually to have that process for reviewing the monitoring reports and how the board is gonna do that the superintendent puts forth. So, I mean, I'm fine with taking up both of those things.
well, I think that the policy committee went out of existence because
did.
its task was ended
Uh-huh.
as constituted, and I believe that when we get to that
Okay.
particular item, the task will be defined exactly in the several ways you just defined it.
Well, there you go.
Randy?
So thank you for that, and I also had that same interpretation, and I had other interpretations.
Yeah.
So that's where I
Sure.
got stuck. So one of the thoughts that I had was, is this applying only to time when they're at work? Or is this intended to be potentially outside of that? Like, if somebody is at a protest somewhere, and it's for, I don't know what, but like something out in the community is protection for employees against some sort of response from me for actions that they took someplace. So I just wanted to be really crystal clear that what I was interpreting was what you also thought. So that's where that came from. I'm not sure, Herb, I'm gonna mention this now, but you can, it probably has a greater discussion when we get down to that policy committee question, but we had Meadowy's meeting last night, and so the same monitoring report went to them. And so I shared with them that as we're adjusting policies, it would be really wonderful for me if they were the same, and that we don't, as we're going through this work, we're not adjusting individually, and I'm trying to manage that. I just operationally, I can't do that. So they, in last night's meeting, appointed 2 Meadowy representatives to join your policy discussions on the policies that both of you share, so that they could collectively work together and then report back to boards. So I wanted to see, I'm mentioning that now because this is one of actually 4 things that surfaced last night, that they would like to join you for discussions for that, so.
As long as they agree with us, it's fine.
So I have a question about whether this is restricted to things that just happen in school. I'm assuming it's broader than that, because if, for example, we had a teacher who wrote a column, like those of you who read the Rutland Herald have seen the poor, what's his name here, poor Elijah,
Yeah.
who was pretty critical of the way some schools operate. If we had somebody like that, it would also apply to what they wrote, wouldn't it?
Well, that's really why I'd like the board to discuss it.
Sure. I would hope it would. I don't think a teacher should be discriminated against because they publicly, non-disruptively stayed a position on something.
Not that
It doesn't say that.
plan on doing anything, just make sure that I'm interpreting what you
Yeah.
think I should be interpreting.
Any other comments on this? I just have one other. I appreciate the 2 evidence points here, but in this context, there may be some other contexts, simply having rules and protocols doesn't guarantee they're actually being followed. And I think somebody needs to monitor that. Next item is the wellness policy, which is also just a report. Anybody have any comments or questions on it? Dick?
I think we've made considerable gains, as this is, I think, our third wellness report.
I believe so.
And we seem to have fewer items in the partial compliance than ever before. I think we're gaining on it, I think we're sensitive to it, and I think the staff in particular is remarkably proactive in trying to make sure that our students are given every opportunity to be well.
I have a question, I don't know whether this is for the policy, for the new policy committee, or for who. If we look on page 18, item E is only partial compliance because, in a way, food is used as a reward, and I'm wondering whether this needs to be resolved by possibly changing the policy rather than the practice.
I don't believe, I think that the problem is that periodically elementary schools have given some kind of reward in the form of a class or project result, and therefore there is a bit of a use of food as part of the reward. I don't think that there's any malfeasance to that, and I don't think anybody really objects to allowing students to celebrate something that they did well.
Well, in that case, should the food shall not be used in district schools as a reward or punishment be changed?
I'm not sure it's our policy.
Where did it come from?
It's
It's
a
ours.
it's a mandatory state policy.
We do have a bit of a conflict here.
It's once again with the august and all-knowing state to dictate to us what we have to do.
And the board can also accept that we're in partial compliance
Right.
and be okay with that. And say, we understand that sometimes kids earn ice cream, and we're okay with that.
But some time ago, we had, members of some of our communities raising this as an issue, and I think one of the big concerns was that you're holding out something that is, not very healthy as a, as a reward for everything. And that, that,
ice cream.
like ice cream, and it's, so there were people who were concerned about that point, I think. At the same time, there's a question of frequency and all. So maybe it's, I would vote for accepting partial compliance myself, but.
We all get ice cream, we all do mine. Where's her reward? Do we do it?
It's called pizza.
It's called pizza, yeah. Okay, any other comments or questions on the wellness report?
Deb's got a hand up.
Yes, Deb?
You're on mute, Deb.
You muted?
Deb, you're still muted.
And we no longer have pictures of M&Ms and candy bars at our school board meeting.
That is
Say
true.
a good example.
It's because
Pizza, that's
Jackie's
healthy.
not here. She's so much better at that than I am.
Oh, I forgot about that.
I do miss those.
Oh, see, I know.
I don't think it needs
Oh,
to be
yeah.
punished, though. Okay.
Those are the leftovers for what they used to give the kids.
Now, go on to the superintendent's report, starts on packet page 20. Maybe anything you want to particularly call attention to or update us on?
It's a very, very full superintendent report. There's a lot of information in here. I think a lot of it is very relevant. I will draw attention to, I think, a couple of things. I'd like to say something that I think is important to say, that's not in here. because I feel like it's just important that I make a comment to the board tonight on this. I shared it at communication with you on Friday about a BB gun coming to one of our schools, and I wanted to let the board know that I am really, really looking carefully into the situation. I've spent much of the last 2 days at the school really learning what happened, and I will continue to do so. I feel like we have a very safe situation right now. I'm not concerned. I feel very good about the action that was taken, and so I am kind of looking at the specifics related to what happened, and learning what I need to learn for the school and for the rest of the system. I'm also looking at practices and protocols related to how do we respond. We've got systems in place. Was there breakdown? Is there anything we need to look at and adjust organizationally at the building? And then also, kind of the final will be looking at, are there changes we need to make to systemic practices across the system? So I want you to know that this is a priority for me. Even as we're winding down school, I will continue to be working on it. Every summer, we do a review of safety, and we're going to be talking about 2 new policies coming up. Last year, we put a ton in place. This summer, we'll be retraining people on protocols. I'll be looking at what we have in place and updating as we need to. It was concerning, and I just want you to know that I'm really taking it seriously and attending carefully to it. I might not be as prepared for some later agenda items as I would have been, but to me, this is what the work needed to be. So I wanted to just take a moment to share that with the board. As we look at the report that I did write for you, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know we're on a time, we're cognizant of the time, but I think one of the things that is important for me to point out to you is near the end of my report, comments I put in around GISP, because our equity committee took one of those findings from our audit, and we spent time discussing GISP and really, really looking at that as a practice, and the group agreed that this is a central part to our community, and it's a priority for our community, and it should continue, and we want everybody to be included in it. So we are going to figure out how to do that. I don't have answers yet. I'm working with Bromley. I've let them know about this. We're talking about making sure everyone can access it, how we might staff it, how we make this now a school event. So there's a lot of work to do ahead, but it's a big deal, and it's a big change in practice from a number of fronts. I have a lot of questions that I don't have answers to yet, but I did want you to know that we're going to be doing this work. We'll be coordinating efforts with all of the groups that we work with, coordinating communication, and coming up with a plan. So I wanted you to know that.
Not important now.
All right, anyway, is that mine? So, all right, what can I answer for you that's in here?
Melanie?
I just want to say thank you for addressing the GISP in the way that you are, not getting rid of it, because it is a huge part of, it was a huge part of myself, as I taught GISP before I had kids, taught it when I had kids. It's how I became part of the Sunderland community, it's how I got to know kids. So as a community project, I understand the inequities of it, but I also understand that we have very few community programs like that here, so I really appreciate that you, before we get rid of it, because we understand the problems, we're taking a holistic approach to how can we maybe make this better. So thank you for doing that.
Well, it was a committee, but I will pass that on.
Pass that on to the committee.
I will
then.
definitely
Thank you.
do that.
John?
What's the current participation rate?
Well,
Say that in there,
so
understand?
but I said that, did I say the numbers? It was rough. I know that it's not accurate as it could be, but we're looking anywhere from, as far as non-participation, anywhere from about 25 to 30% up to about 60%, depending on the school. So to me, that that's concerning.
And is there a correlation between the FRL rate and the non-participation rate of those schools?
There's again, not super deep dive, but there is a correlation between people who might identify as historically marginalized
Yeah.
and participation.
Yeah.
So it extends beyond just one subgroup, it extends to a number of subgroups.
Thank you.
So,
Jim?
Yeah, just quick on the fiscal '24 tax estimates, just want to make sure I understand or other people understand.
yes,
This is essentially, this is the pupil weighting, it's been put in place, so this is, if it had applied this year.
Correct.
This is the impact it would have had.
What would the impact have been?
Thank you.
Correct.
Jeff?
On that question, that's a little more of an impact than we originally anticipated. It's 3.5 cents, equalized cents, I guess, effective tax rate, more than the current year's tax rate. And when you add the CLA, it most
Well,
likely goes up from there. But I guess my question is, why does one think that is the case? The poverty ratio is more meaningful, I gather, under the new formula than it was under the old formula. How does the agency get the poverty ratio number? I hope they don't use free and reduced lunch numbers to do that, do they? Or, 'cause I know
They've never used free and reduced
Okay.
numbers to do that.
They use
And-
census,
and
or?
they get their numbers directly from the Department of Children and
DCF.
Family, yeah, DCF,
DCF.
yes, thank you, Children and Families. But remember that going forward, we are going to be collecting data from all of our families using a new state form, which is very similar to a free and reduced form, but
Okay.
narrowed down. So it's a one-pager so that people can report on their personal status, hopefully in a somewhat simplified format to allow us to collect that data, and that is the data that we are going to use in conjunction with
Yeah.
other data that they're collecting.
Okay.
They have, they just actually put this out, that they're going to be expanding the way that they collect data, so we're not going to get it just from one
Good.
department.
Okay.
And even on the free and reduced front, we're actually a pilot for the new program,
Yes.
right?
Good.
To be collecting this data and see how
Tip
it
the spear.
works. And I think we really need it, we need to have as much data coming from the outside as we can, because we know how hard it is to get families
Right.
to fill out these forms.
Yeah, we'll have to go door to door maybe. Be very worth it.
We'll send you guys all out there.
Sure, no problem.
They've tried bribery, so.
Yeah.
We do a little of that every year.
Suzanne has a question.
Sorry for my ignorance on this, but who sees this data and how is it protected?
oh, it's very protected.
Very, yes.
Very protected. So our director of food service has access to it, and I can get access to it.
Okay,
That's it.
okay.
So, yeah.
Comments, questions?
I actually have one other piece of information to share with you. Let me find my note on this. We found out yesterday, I think this is important for you to know, this is a BRSU data, not Taconic and Green. But we found out yesterday that we were awarded a grant that's just over $16,000 annually, but the recipients last year apparently didn't request their grant, so that means we get last year's grant and this year's grant, so which is about $32,000. We are receiving this grant because we, the BRSU has the largest increase in immigrant population of any district in the state over the last 4 years.
Percentage?
Must be percent.
Probably percent, yeah, percent.
That's amazing.
So I've shared with you that our population has been rapidly changing. We've increased ELL services and staff. It's totally awesome. I love going to our schools and seeing a level of cultural and racial diversity that we haven't had in the past. And this was unexpected. I did not realize, So I just want you to be aware of that. So we'll be using this money to further support that program. It's a grant from the state Title III.
It's federal.
Yeah.
It comes through the feds, through the state from the feds, yes.
Okay, of course.
So,
David, hand up.
oh yeah, David.
Any other comments?
David.
David?
Yeah, on page 21, you talk of, under compensation and benefits.
Oh, right.
Do you need any action from us
Yeah, thank you for asking. I appreciate that. That is number
Oh,
two
yes.
on the, item of list to discuss. I just want you to know that we do have some people who don't meet that criteria in the top who are on multi-year contracts. And as Sue and I met and we realized, yeah, we do have some folks who we offer multi-year contracts. These are instructional support positions, so they don't fall under a union agreement, but they're not administrative either. So positions that they fall in the category would be something like the success program or bullying, hazing, and harassment, occupational therapy, some behavioral positions. So these folks, we have been offering in some cases, multi-year contracts because it provides them with a level of stability, and so it's like a retention. They feel more secure and knowing that they've got multi-year contracts. And I wanted to draw your attention to that because we're not in compliance with it. So I would like for the board to consider discussing this in your committee, and Meadowy would like to join that committee also.
So, just so I'm clear, these are contracts that you unilaterally offer, not the board?
Yes.
Because, the board,
Yes.
this 2.7 only relates to you, saying that you will not obligate the district for any type of multi-year obligation. And when it comes to labor contracts, it's the board who ratifies and executes that. But are you saying there are other contracts that aren't board approved that
I think it's because these folks are not actually employees of the district, right?
They are not.
Oh, that's a good point too.
No, but that was
They
the
are
point.
SU employees, so that's a good distinction too, now that we're talking
Right.
through it.
Okay.
They
Well, I'm just
are-
wondering,
they are
if there's
SU
any problem here, because, the things that we do on a multi-year basis, the labor contracts, the memorandum of agreement, and things of that nature, those are board actions, not superintendent actions. And this is
For
basically,
licensed people, you're required to do them if they're licensed, but you're not required to approve them if they're not licensed.
Right, they don't have to go to the board
for multi-year,
for a non-licensed.
For a non-licensed person.
but multi-year is the issue here.
That's the question.
Right.
Yeah, it's just saying multi-year
But
obligations.
that's the question.
Right, so anyway, policy committee can look at it.
That's, and again, Meadowy.
Anything else on the superintendent's report? Going ahead then, item 7A was an enrollment request, and Randy, before we get into the specifics of the request, the board that's most likely to have trouble with that request would be Meadowy rather than us, is that right?
Yes,
Because
so.
they're the ones who have to pay.
They would have to pay if that was the direction that they went. So, I want to pronounce your last name the right way. I'm sitting here like. Yeah,
Hill.
I know, you all know them better than I do, and I got all these papers here. So Scott and Heidi came and met with me and kind of expressed what their concerns were and what the requests were, and so we talked about options. So one of them is coming to you for potential enrollment, and also going to Meadowy to discuss tuition based on geographical concerns. So they are aware of that as well.
So Randy, as I read it, the only issue is that we have a statute that says a school board may receive into the schools under its charge non-resident students under such terms and restrictions as it deems best, and money received for the instruction of the student should be paid into the school fund of the district. So the only decision is whether we wanted to receive these students under some terms and restrictions.
So whether you would accept it if Meadowy was paying. It was, I mean, I brought it to you thinking there was discussion about exactly where the property was and it being very close to the Dorset line, and knowing maybe they shouldn't have necessarily come here, I'm thinking now, but Meadowy as well. I mean, could you accept them potentially within the SU or not.
To resolve this, could we maybe have a motion so we know what we're discussing?
Yeah, I'll move that we approve the request subject to the sending district pay all costs associated with the tuition student being sent to TNG.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Dick.
A second, I just wanted to kind of throw, so long as you're planning on moving to Dorset, you know, so it ought to adjust at a later date if that happens.
Well, I don't think that's necessary,
No.
because if they move, then the whole thing goes away anyway.
Yep,
Right.
okay, that's true.
John?
What's the difference between Medway paying and a non-operating district tuitioning? Like why NRN? Like if Win Hall
I
wanted,
don't think there is any.
Yeah, there might not be.
is there, so we
So
would
it'd be
accept any,
based-
Tuition
You
rate
would
set right
accept
about it, our
based on the
operating costs, so-
tuition if there was space, right?
I'm sorry, you're both speaking at the same time, what did you guys say?
Yep, go.
Sorry.
No, I'm just saying, the tuition rate's basically set at the, you know, the operating rate, so, you know, that plus, it's a break even, I think, financially for us, essentially.
Sue, did you want to say something about that?
Well, I think the distinction is that Medowee wouldn't typically send the student to tuition to us, or the
Right.
student to tuition to us. So they're not a normal sending district like, say, Win Hall is. So we're agreeing to accept a student only on these very specific terms, that other district has to agree to pay for it. In other words, we're not opening the door to accepting
Yeah, okay.
any other student. It's
Yeah.
based on,
Yeah.
contingent upon what the other district decides to do.
But
They gotta be
we have
named
no
Board Hill.
special- We have no special process for accepting kids from Win Hall, right? With this?
No.
No,
Okay,
because
just-
they
I understand
they
that.
will by statute have to pay for it.
Yes,
No.
gotcha, all right.
Couldn't they decide to tuition on their own? Does that fall out? I feel like that falls outside of, wouldn't we have to decide that if they wanted tuition on their own, out of their own pocket, we would still take them? Or do we take anybody that wants to tuition here? Or do they have to be
They
from
don't.
only sending
No.
districts?
It's districts, only sending districts,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
We don't accept parental
Right.
placement.
So if Medowee doesn't want to pay the
Yes.
tuition, they
Yeah.
cannot pay?
Right.
According to what, is that already in statute, or is that according to what we're
That's already-
talking
I
about?
think that's in policy.
That's our
Right.
policy.
That's our policy?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, any other discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That appears to pass unanimously. It does pass unanimously. Next
Thank you
item-
for your letter.
Yes, thank you for letting us. Thanks for
Right there, Bob.
And bear in mind that we don't have much time here, folks, we don't have a lot of time here. I would like to see whether somebody would like to make a resolution to thank both of our student representatives for their service this year.
So moved.
Moved by Dick. Is there a second to the resolution? Seconded by Ben.
That's pretty controversial.
Oh, yeah, really good job. All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Well done. Good luck, everyone.
Good luck.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And the next item would be to approve a student representative to replace the one who will be retiring, but I would like to make that effective on August 15th if we could, because Caitlin is willing to continue on the Community Engagement Committee. And I thought, since we're not meeting for anything other than fairly formal purposes between now and August 15th anyway, how about if we have a motion to have the term of the new person start on August 15th?
So moved.
And we also need to name the new person.
David Chandler and I, Herb was not able to be there, but we all read 3 remarkable, extraordinary resumes with recommendations of the new board member. Fortunately, our current junior has agreed previously to continue to serve, and she's done, as we just stated, an outstanding and wonderful job. And we appreciate her expertise. She will be a rising senior, and therefore full of senior advice to the new June. All of the,
Bearing in mind, we only have 10 minutes, Dick.
I just want to say that all three candidates were outstanding. Every one of them could replace any one of us elected by the citizens and do a superb job. We focused for lots of different reasons on Oliver DeMeo from Indian, what's the school?
Long Trail.
Long Trail. I keep confusing Long Trail with Indian Mountain School, which my son attended. Ancient and honorable idiocy. So I move to appoint Oliver DeMeo,
Effective August 15th.
effective August 15th.
Second that?
Okay, moved by Dick, seconded by Jim. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously.
Because both the next two items reflect policies that are mandated, and therefore we traditionally don't change the words and just simply pass them along because the state mandates them. I move that both be accepted, approved at this time, and it will require, unfortunately, because the timing, the special meeting on
July 10th.
July.
Prior to August 1st. I'll second that. And just,
But
yeah, 'cause
it will require another meeting
State
to
requires
approve
it to be in place by August 1st.
So I move both.
Okay, moved by Dick. Is there a second? Seconded by Jim. I have just a question about the numbering. Shouldn't these be MPs rather than Fs?
I can go back and check. I would have to
Be
just
the
look.
next in the MP numbering, right? Because we don't have any policies that begin with F.
Probably, right,
No,
that,
as a state, they're calling it
Yeah.
F, so, or
That's
actually, the SBA is calling it F.
we'll align it with ours.
Yeah.
Let me double check that.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second, any discussion? I hope not. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously. Just looking at the monitoring of policies 3.0 and 3.3, and here's more grist for the middle of the new policy committee.
I think I have more on this.
Anybody want to discuss that item at all? I just have a question. How many board members replied this time? Was it actually 13? It looks like it was from the draft, maybe. Ice cream, yeah.
Next meeting.
Although it could have been 15, but
Yeah, but
that
that's
seems pretty good.
we deserve ice cream.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Okay, we got ice cream pizza next time.
Apples with peanut butter?
Jeff?
Just so people are aware, I mean, we went through this sort of exercise last year about which policy governance policies comply with Carver. I don't know how many people have read Carver, but again, that gets back to also, doing a little more maybe re-education at some point in time with folks who may not be fully up to speed on policy governance, because it is essentially the framework we work under, and I think it'd be helpful to discuss some of the basics at some point. But 3.0 and the other threes are taken right from Carver, and those were recommendations by Val Gardner. Doesn't mean we can't change them, but it's sort of like the framework that most Vermont districts are working from.
Thank you. Anything else on that item? No.
Do we have most Vermont districts are using policy governance right now?
No.
I thought there was
No,
like
most
two.
do not.
And some say they are, but they're not really.
I thought, yeah, I didn't think hardly anybody's using policy governance.
This may be redundant from earlier this meeting, but at the same time, just wanted to suggest, well, we go through these pretty quickly and then say we're in good shape. That, I really do think the policy committee spending time with all of these comments and kind of trying to unpack them is a really good practice, because There are probably some reasonable ideas in here.
Not probably, there
Jim,
always are.
is there one you would like to highlight, Jim?
No?
I know which one though, because I can tell by the way you use dashes.
Oh, yeah. Giving it away, yes. We've gotta start using chat GPT or whatever.
Just got it in place, and we're gonna rework it all.
Yeah. Okay. So we need to reconstitute the policy committee, and let's see, who were the members of the last policy committee?
I was a member, Jeff was a member, Deborah was a member,
Suzanne?
was a,
You were?
yes, you were officially a member. You actually helped to create one of the comments that the board accepted, and you were the principal author. So, because we have some experience, I, for one, am willing to continue to serve, would be happy to be joined by my other three colleagues and anybody else who likes to wordsmith and debate these issues relatively briefly but efficiently.
All right. So our first nominee therefore is Dick. And would any other current members like to continue? I hope you would.
Yeah, I will.
Okay, Suzanne will, Jeff will,
Deb's got her hand up.
and Deb will.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
I think there's probably room for at least one more if anybody's interested.
But we have the middle school committee coming up too,
Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
we should probably,
So many options.
And we have a community engagement committee.
I just didn't want to cut it off.
and the community engagement committee? Or that is the community?
We
have
are, no,
one.
that's separately, that is one.
It met before the meeting started.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been here since 5:30.
Going in?
I move, in addition,
Away
the
from middle
task
school one.
that we've discussed periodically throughout the meeting be assigned, and it's essentially a broad-scale review, largely articulated by Jeff throughout the course of the meeting.
Okay, so we have a motion to do that and also simultaneously to appoint Dick, Suzanne, Jeff, and Deb, right?
Yes.
Did I leave anybody out? No, okay. All right, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously. And you've seen the work plan, is there anything missing there?
Did you just say everything? I'm sorry, I feel like I didn't totally understand what Dick was saying. I apologize. Did we just define what the policy
Yeah.
committee's doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanna make sure
It's been articulated mostly by Jeff, but others, for example, Jim just added to the task. It's to
Suggestion.
review the several different series of suggestions, monitoring report 2.2, some of the concerns that you raised, 2.7, the concerns that you raised in your superintendent's report, and any other issues
General review.
that have been suggested as we've gone through the monitoring policies.
What if I have something that is not, that I was wanting to get something else in there? Am I too late?
Dick, how about if you simply expand to a general
And,
review?
and a general review.
Okay.
But that, you did say something about Medowee joining us so that the policies were aligned.
Right.
So that was included in the series of recommendations that were made.
Okay. Okay. I'm looking, I'm no longer online, so that's why I'm no longer on my screen. Herb, I had emailed you, regarding, a request about flying flags and statute around that, so I was trying to pull up this statute that I can't get online right now, so I can't pull it up, but currently it's, we can only fly an American flag or a state flag on a flagpole. And as I read the most current statute, if you want, as a board, as a district, for us to be considering flying something else, that the board needs to have a procedure in place to do that. I don't know whether it makes sense to bring this discussion to the committee for them to discuss whether that is something that they want to do or not. But I wanted to, because it's a little bit out of the scope of what Dick said, but I want
would
to put
suggest that
it,
since that's not really a policy of governance
Right.
policy,
it's not.
probably shouldn't necessarily be something the policy committee has to deal with.
Thank God.
Okay, so I just want, so I do want to be clear that if that's okay, if the board does not want to take it up, I just want to be clear that it's something that you are looking, if I determine that it should be responded to, you're saying go ahead and look into it and write an administrative procedure for it. It's a little bit different than what I typically do. That's why I felt like I wanted to at least have a discussion and make sure people are on the same page. I think it's something that is a little bit bigger than me, but if that's the direction you want me to go, I'm happy to do something and bring it to you.
Well, that wasn't actually my thought. My
Okay.
thought was if what the policy governance committee is doing is reviewing the policy governance policies, that's not part of that job.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, it's a policy governance committee, not a
Yeah.
policy committee.
But on the other hand,
Yeah, that's not clear.
unless there's some guidance already in our policies that tells you what to do about flying other flags, I don't think that we have given you sufficient guidance so that you can just say either I'm going to or I'm not going to. I think
Right.
this has to come to the board at some point.
All right, that,
Melanie and then Jeff?
Two questions. One, is the statute a federal, state?
it's
State.
state, yeah.
State statute,
I just
right.
can't, like I said, I'm
And-
on, so I
and-
can't pull it up.
And I tried to look up the state statute, and unless I found the wrong one, I don't think it's quite as clear as Randy remembers it being. But regardless of that,
Well,
I personally think we need a policy.
I also would disagree with the fact that it's policy governance, or at least I would have thought, we've always called ourselves a policy committee. And I feel like the ENDS policy isn't specifically policy governance. So I guess I'd be interested to hear.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think the ends policy is definitely just policy governance.
Okay.
And the policy committee, whatever we call it, has only dealt with policy governance. And my thought on this particular issue that Randy's raised about the flag is that maybe you can take a look at the law, think about it, over the next few weeks, give us some ideas about what your thoughts may be on it, and we can take it up at a future board meeting. In reference to Dick's motion, which I guess is on the floor, when he's basically suggesting,
We voted to appoint the policy committee.
no, I don't think we
We
did,
haven't
did we?
voted yet.
We haven't voted?
I don't think so.
No, because I interrupted it.
Right, right. No, I don't think we
I
did.
thought we
You did vote,
voted.
and then I saw that.
You
Yes.
voted.
So-
Along with Dick's motions.
Yeah. Well, let's ask Dawn.
Yeah, I thought we
we
were on the
already
work
voted
plan.
But anyway, the motion itself, I mean, Dick basically, I think it was a question about what the motion
Hold
was.
it,
I don't
folks,
think we
one at a
voted.
time, please. Jeff is speaking.
Dick basically suggested, is what I said, was the motion, and part of it is indeed, most of it's basically looking at the policies the way I understand it, looking at the comments associated with those policies, and proposing revisions where necessary. The other part of it we discussed earlier, though, that we don't want to lose sight is the review of the monitoring reports by the CEO in recommending a review process associated with that. So I just want to make sure that Part-
Those were both part of my motion.
makes the minutes as well.
Okay, any other
Got it?
comments on?
Yeah, write it down.
Okay,
I'll write Dick's motion down.
so, and is everybody comfortable with the suggestion that I think Jeff just made about how we handled this particular flag issue? So, well, that'll be a future agenda item at some point when Randy wants it to be. John?
I just think as far as guidance on this in connection with ENDS policy, seems to me it's a question of student voice and do our ENDS policy. I was trying to bring it up, but do our ENDS policies discuss that, and is this a topic for further exploration? Not just the flags, but how do we, so I would assume, bring flags up, read
I mean,
student voice.
I just
I have
saw,
a
by the
statue
way,
online, if anyone
somebody
wants to
put
hear
in
it.
the chat, the statute, which I think is the same one I was looking at, which I don't think is absolutely
There's a
explicit.
few, there's 3 that related to flags,
Okay.
Okay.
but
Suzanne,
There is precedent at neighboring communities and schools that can be observed as well, if anybody wants to,
yeah.
so.
anything else on that item? Okay.
Did we vote?
Back to the work, we already voted
Yes.
on our motion. We can do it again if you'd like.
I don't remember voting, but
Yeah, I don't
I'm in
know.
favor of it.
You voted.
Who seconded
Pardon?
it?
Did somebody second it?
No.
Dick's motion?
Yeah.
I'll second it,
Okay. Okay, you can put in Suzanne second.
thank you.
I don't think.
No, you don't, all right, fine. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand, once or again.
Can we clarify what motion we're now talking
This
about?
is the motion I think we already passed, which was to appoint the policy committee and state its job.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought we already voted on that.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's do it again to make sure. All in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand.
I apologize for
Anybody abstaining,
confusing
please
it.
raise your hand. That passes unanimously again.
Well, whoever checks this recording later, please email us.
Yeah, let us know if we voted on this or not.
Okay,
We're doubly appointed.
anything else on the work plan? Folks, keep an eye on the
I
time,
didn't
please.
know.
Yes.
Is our retreat the August 15th date? Because
Yes.
it says August 15th and then the retreat underneath it. So are we doing like we did last year, where we do a meeting and then the retreat? Okay.
All supposed to happen from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's gonna be so, it's gonna be cool.
she's taking an ice cream training.
And
Ice cream.
we were promised for good behavior, ice cream. I'm just saying.
Okay. I think we should let Caitlin have ice cream if we have any, if she decides to come as our All right. We are now into our second public comment period.
Oh,
Would
I've got-
anybody- I'm sorry, Deb, what?
Can I
is this
request
pub-
a future
is this-
agenda item?
Pardon? What
Can
item?
Future
I
agenda.
can I suggest a future agenda?
I'm sorry, I skipped over that. Please do.
I just wondered if for our retreat, we might ask Randy to share with us any concerns or challenges that she may see coming up, either in the short term or the long term. They might be things like, enrollment, staffing, budgeting, security, issues of sustainability, that she thinks are things that we need to look at. And I suggest this for 2 reasons that have to do with policy governance, but one is that we say we want to look into the future, but we don't really do it very often. And this would be our chance to do that rather than reacting to things as they come up. But more important, it would be a way to support Randy in any of the decisions that she has to make, if in some unlikely case, difficult situations arise. But this would be a good thing to discuss at the retreat. I mean, I don't mean to be an alarmist, I just think we should sort of keep our eyes open and support Randy and let her express any concerns she might have.
Okay, I apologize for skipping over the future agenda items.
Oh, no, it's
We already
okay.
mentioned a few as it is, but does anybody have any other ones? Thank you, Deb. Okay. Second public comment period. Would any of the public like to comment on anything? Yes, sir.
Just a question on our next steps for the enrollment process, just my own
That's
clarification.
between you folks and the
Okay.
superintendent and Medowee.
Okay.
We're out of it.
Yeah, we're out. We did our part. Yes, sir.
I have a question, what's the
Just bring ice cream.
JSIP program?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The JISP program?
What's it
Just-
stand for?
Junior Instructional Ski Program.
Say again?
Junior Instructional Ski Program or snowboard, do I got that right?
Or skate.
Yeah.
It's been around for how long?
Skating?
Winter sports program, for a long, long time.
50 years?
Yep,
At least
probably about 50
37.
years. Yeah.
Any other public comments, including remote? If you're remote and you want to make a comment, please raise your electronic hand. Can't see any. All right, I apologize for the fact that it's over to 20 of. I would like to
That's pretty
continue
good,
because we do have an item for an executive session here that I think has some urgency, right, Randy?
Yeah, we've got folks on
Yeah.
to join this meeting, yeah.
So is it okay if we run for another 10 or 15 minutes?
For executive session?
Yeah.
Okay. And we need a motion to go into executive
But
session.
before
Yeah,
that,
you need
what?
to.
do you do what you traditionally do, which is reflect on the norm, announce the next meetings, so that all we do when we come out of the executive session
Good point.
is to adjourn?
So norms are on packet page 2. Take a look, and if you think that we missed anything, now is one of the times to say so. You can also let me or any of the other board officers know if you think we missed something here. Thank all the public for coming.
Thank you.
And the purpose of the meeting on July 10th is maybe only to adopt the policies that you just approved this evening. It'll be a very short meeting. Anything on any item other than executive session and adjournment?
You
Yes,
might include as a possibility for June 10th,
July.
based on board members and other people interest in serving on the middle school committee that we established tonight. Want to expand and have a brief discussion with respect to going forward and getting that committee going.
Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I don't have much thoughts.
We didn't have to establish a committee tonight.
No.
I guess the question is, are we gonna have a majority of the board here? And if you're not gonna be
Okay,
here
that's
and
fine.
you wanna,
Just,
Well, if we don't
we
have
can
a
wait.
majority, we
I'm
can't adopt
sorry.
the policies either.
correct.
so
It's great.
it can be postponed to August, but
Doesn't matter either one.
and maybe by then we can get an idea of what the constituency should be.
So, sorry, that's a Monday, July 10th?
Yes.
Monday, July 10th. Well, very short meeting virtually with all boards.
You can come here
Just
if you
adopt
want, but aside from maybe the public engagement committee, which is gonna meet right after that, I don't think anybody's gonna be here physically.
6.
I'm gonna zoom in if we can.
Yeah, I mean, I will too, because I got the next committee coming up after. All right,
So I'm sorry,
Aside-
that August meeting is during the day, right? It's not at,
6
Oh,
p.m.
yeah, that's the wrong time, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It should be, right,
3 to
thank
9.
you.
because I thought we
It's-
did that before.
And it's in person,
Yeah,
it's
you got a good
3
point
to,
there.
9 to 3.
Right.
And it's in person at the BRSU.
Right.
So I apologize for not catching that.
No problem.
Good point.
That's the August meeting, yep, and July 10th is very virtual, it's simply to adopt the new policies.
Very virtual.
Okay, aside from the executive session and adjournment, does anybody have any other business?
Deb raised her hand.
Deb,
You're muted.
you're muted.
I just wanted to thank all the public who attended tonight. We don't usually have so many people attending, and that's a good thing. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, anything else other than executive session and adjournment? All right, we need a motion to go into executive
So moved.
session, moved by Dick, is there a second? Seconded by Ben. All in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. All right, we will enter executive session in just a minute.
Okay.
Implications to
Can we, yeah, I want to be clear, so we need the public, either we need to leave and go into breakout room, or the public need to leave, we probably need to enter a breakout room, but I received an email right before this meeting, Herb, there's a number of people on this that are here, present virtually, who want to join the person who is coming into executive session. And so typically you would ask people to come in. I just want to be clear that there's a group of people that the person who is making the request wants to bring, and
Is that standard?
Can we
Is that-
get that person on the record with naming them, just so we're
Right.
absolutely sure that they should be in the
That's,
executive
okay.
session?
So that's what I want. So, do you want to name them and then we can open up a breakout room? Is that what you'd like?
I'm sorry, who's the them you're referring to?
So the person who's on the call right now, who we're going to be going to an executive session for their request, do you want to have that person right now state the name of the people that they'd like to join the executive session?
Yes.
Okay,
But it's up to us as to whether or not we allow.
it is up to you,
Right.
right, okay, so do you wanna, the person's name is Melissa, who is making the request.
And then if Melissa could maybe just very briefly state why she thinks it's appropriate for these other folks to be part of the executive session.
Hold on,
Let
are
us
we in
decide.
executive session
We're
right
not
now?
in executive session,
Can we even have that discussion
So, yeah.
outside?
yeah, I
We
mean,
have to?
We have to, before we
Okay.
go into executive session, state the invitees. And we always include the superintendent in an executive session.
That's right,
And
okay.
in this particular case, it sounds like Melissa, and there may be others, who the group would like to be included.
And I believe Deb and Dave both want to say something about this. Deb, why don't you go first? No.
She doesn't.
David, did you want to say something about the executive session? No. Okay. All right, and Dick is right. We had to redo this because the motion didn't state who was going to be in the executive session other than the board and the superintendent.
Right. We have to also state why we're going, under what.
Yes.
And that's in the agenda, but the motion ought to specify 1 VSA 313A6.
Gotcha.
So let's first of all hear from Melissa about the people that she would like to include and why. Bear in mind, Melissa, this is not an executive session, so anything you say right now is public record.
You're muted, Melissa, you're muted.
Melissa, we can't hear you. We still can't hear you.
We're still not hearing you.
She's showing it muted.
Yeah, and you're showing us muted.
I think she had headphones in that weren't, she wasn't being able to speak through.
This is a room, so this is the second room.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I am asking for a residency waiver for my foster son. And the people that I would like to include in this meeting are support staff at school that can support how much progress he has made at this school. So that is why I have them here.
Could you name them, please?
Catherine Wright.
Sorry, could you repeat that? Could you repeat that, please?
Catherine Wright.
Go ahead.
Lap Chin Kiyum. And then with me in this room, I have Katie Palmer and Katie Doyle.
I move that we go into executive session inviting Melissa, Catherine Wright, Los C. King, Katie Palmer, and Catherine Doyle. Pursuant to Title I VSA paragraph 313A6.
Section 313A6, okay. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Suzanne. All right. Any discussion on the motion? All right. All those in favor of going into executive session, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand.
Is there anybody else?
Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand.
Is there anybody else on the?
Yeah, I'm gonna open up,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna open up a breakout room because there are some folks here who would not be going into executive session.
And for the folks who are not included, this is the only remaining item of business, so there's nothing really that, other than hearing somebody move to adjourn, you're ready here in the public session.
So there's no action on this item?
No,
We don't know.
we don't know.
So there might be.
Well, true, there might be action on this item.
Usually in an executive session, the action, if it's communicated, is done after the fact.
No,
It has-
in open session.
In
In
open
open
session.
I understand that. But there's
So do
more
we
that
want
could,
to include, and
Well,
no, I was just,
what Jeff is bringing up is
I
the
know.
fact that I was slightly wrong, because aside from a motion to adjourn, you might be hearing a motion to act on an enrollment request. But there will not be, at that point, any additional information probably.
Okay. So are we ready to open up the rooms? We're gonna have to wait though for,
Yeah.
are you able to leave this stuff and come back, or do you need to take it all down?
I'm just gonna pull it all out.
Okay, perfect. All right, yeah, we'll help, whatever we